Chapter 1. The Wasting. The morning mist clung to Millbrook Settlement like a burial shroud. It carried the sweet, sick scent that only comes when children are dying. I pressed my ear against the thin wall separating our quarters from the Crane family next door, listening to Mrs. Crane's muffled sobs as she watched her 8-year-old fade away one breath at a time.
The wasting plague. That's what we called it, though none of us understood what it truly was. No fever burned these children's foreheads. No rash marked their skin. They simply dimmed. Like candle flames running out of wick, their eyes grew hollow, their voices whispered to nothing, their small bodies becoming light as autumn leaves until they cracked apart at the slightest touch. I gathered my makeshift medical kit, salvaged antibiotics that expired years ago, herbal tinctures brewed from memory of my mother's botanical journals, and desperate hope that this time would be different. The settlement's narrow corridors echoed with my worn boots against metal grating as I made my way toward another house of mourning.
Vera.
Old Henrik's weathered voice stopped me at the intersection. His granddaughter Mila had been one of the first to show symptoms.
How many more?
I met his rheumy eyes, seeing my own exhaustion reflected there. 7.
Henrik's shoulders sagged like he'd been carrying stones and someone had just added another.
My Mila. She ain't eaten anything in 3 days. Just stares at the wall like she's seeing something the rest of us can't.
The weight of his words settled in my chest. 7 children. In a settlement of barely 300, we couldn't afford to lose 7 children. We couldn't afford to lose one. I'll check on her after Tommy, I promised, though promises felt hollow when you had nothing to back them up except expired medicine and prayers to gods who'd proven they cared nothing for human suffering.
Henrik nodded and shuffled away, his thick fingers wiping at eyes that had seen too much loss.
I continued toward the Crane dwelling, my medical kit feeling heavier with each step. The door hung slightly ajar, and I could hear Mrs. Crane inside, humming one of the old lullabies in a voice thick with tears. I knocked twice, our signal that it was me, and pushed inside. The smell hit me immediately. Not death, not yet, but something close. Something that spoke of life gradually abandoning ship. Tommy lay on a mattress salvaged from the ruins of the old world, his small frame barely making a dent in the worn fabric. His mother sat beside him, her calloused hands smoothing his dark hair while her voice cracked on the familiar melody. "How is he?" I asked, though I could see the answer in the transparent quality of his skin, the way his chest barely rose and fell.
Same as yesterday, but less.
Mrs. Crane's voice held the particular quality of a woman who'd cried herself empty but couldn't stop trying.
He asked for water this morning, but when I brought it, he just looked at it, like he'd forgotten what water was for.
I knelt beside the mattress, pulling my stethoscope from the kit. The metal was cold against my fingers. Everything was cold these days, as if warmth itself was abandoning the settlement along with hope. Tommy's pulse fluttered against my fingertips like a bird with a broken wing, weak, irregular, fading. "Tommy?" I kept my voice gentle, though I knew from experience that these children retreated so far inside themselves that even gentle voices sounded like thunder. "Can you hear me?" His eyes, once bright brown, now the color of muddy water, tracked slowly toward my face. For a moment, something flickered there. Recognition, maybe. Or just the reflection of dim light filtering through their cracked window.
Vera.
His voice was less than a whisper.
The trees. They're calling.
A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the settlement's poor heating. 3 other children had mentioned trees before we lost them. Trees that shouldn't exist, calling to them in voices only they could hear.
Mrs. Crane's humming faltered.
He's been saying that all morning, about trees. We ain't got any trees near the settlement, Vera. You know that.
I did know that. The gods' conquest had left the landscape scarred and broken, most vegetation withering under the weight of divine battles 20 years past. The few hardy scrubs that survived were tough, practical things. Nothing that could be called beautiful, nothing that would call to dying children. I know. I checked Tommy's temperature with the back of my hand, finding his skin fever cool despite the normal reading on my salvaged thermometer. Mrs. Crane, has he eaten anything? Even a little?
Won't touch food. Water either now. Just stares and talks about those damn trees.
I pulled my herbal kit from the medical bag, fingers automatically selecting the tinctures I'd tried on the others. Willow bark for pain, though these children showed no signs of discomfort. Echinacea for immune support, though their bodies seemed to be shutting down from the inside out. Ginseng for energy, though what good was energy when the will to live was flickering away? This might help. I mixed the tinctures with practiced efficiency, though my hand shook slightly as I remembered preparing the same mixture for little Sarah Hendricks 2 days ago. She'd taken 3 sips before her parents found her empty as a shed snakeskin the next morning.
Tommy accepted the medicine without protest, his throat working automatically to swallow. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe this time. Maybe with a different combination, a different approach.
Vera,
Mrs. Crane's voice was barely audible.
tell me straight. Is my boy going to die?
I stared down at Tommy's translucent features, at the way his small hands lay motionless against the rough blanket. Medical training screamed that yes, he was dying. That whatever this wasting plague was, I had no tools to fight it. But something deeper. Maybe desperation, maybe the last stubborn spark of my mother's determination, refused to accept defeat. Not if I can help it, I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being.
Mrs. Crane nodded, her eyes bright with tears she couldn't afford to shed.
He used to help me in the hydroponic gardens, you know, before. Had such careful hands with the seedlings. Said he was going to grow real trees someday. Tall ones that reached the sky.
The irony cut deep. Tommy had dreamed of trees, and now trees were calling him away from us. I packed my kit with mechanical precision, mind already racing toward the next house, the next child who might be saved if I could just find the right combination of remedies. I'll be back this evening, I told Mrs. Crane. Keep him comfortable. Keep talking to him, even if he doesn't respond. Sometimes, I thought of my mother's voice, calling me back from fever dreams when I was young. Sometimes they can hear us even when they can't answer. I left the Crane dwelling with Tommy's whispered words echoing in my mind. Trees calling. 3 other children had said the same thing before they faded away entirely. Whatever was taking our children, it wasn't natural. But then again, nothing in our world had been natural since the gods returned. The settlement's main corridor stretched before me, lined with dwellings hastily constructed from salvaged materials 20 years ago and never properly maintained since. Rust bloomed across metal walls like disease, and the recycled air carried the perpetual smell of too many people living too close together with too little hope. I passed the community kitchen where volunteers ladled out thin soup to anyone with credits to spare. The old-timers sat huddled around makeshift tables, their conversations a low murmur of complaints about food ratios and speculation about the weather. None of them mentioned the children. They'd learned, over the years, that acknowledging tragedy only made it more real.
Vera.
Jonas's voice called from one of the workshop alcoves. My youngest brother emerged from behind a pile of canvas and metal tubing, his dark hair falling across his forehead in the way that made settlement girls go nervous and giggly around him.
How's Tommy?
The question hit harder coming from Jonas. Maybe because he still held on to enough optimism to think my answer might be good news. Maybe because his artist's eyes saw too much, understood too well the weight I carried. Same as the others. I didn't slow my pace, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. Jonas fell into step beside me, his long legs easily matching my stride.
Dad's been asking. Says you missed dinner again last night.
Had rounds to make.
Vera,
His hand touched my arm, gentle but insistent.
when's the last time you slept? Really slept? Not just collapsed over your medical kit for a couple hours?
I stopped walking and turned to face him. At 19, Jonas was only 5 years younger than me, but sometimes the gap felt like decades. He still had room in his life for art, for dreams, for questions that didn't involve calculating how many children we could afford to lose before the settlement collapsed entirely. I'll sleep when I figure out how to save them.
And if you can't?
The question hung between us like a blade. I looked at my brother, sensitive, creative Jonas, who painted beautiful things in a world that had forgotten beauty existed, and felt the familiar urge to shield him from truths too harsh for someone who still believed in hope. Then I'll sleep when they're gone, I said finally. But not before. Jonas's expression shifted, and for a moment I saw past his youth to the steel underneath. He might be an artist, but he was still an Ashworth. Still my mother's son.
What do you need me to do?
The simple offer nearly undid me. No arguments about my health, no lectures about accepting what couldn't be changed. Just willingness to help bear a burden that was crushing me alive. Keep Lydia and Samuel away from the infected sectors, I managed. And maybe paint something beautiful. These families need to remember that beauty still exists. He nodded, understanding passing between us without words. Jonas squeezed my shoulder once, then headed back toward his workshop. I watched him go, grateful for the reminder that not everything in our world was dying. The next house belonged to the Petrov family. Their daughter Anna had shown the first signs yesterday, the telltale listlessness, the way her eyes seemed to focus on something beyond the settlement walls. I knocked and was invited inside by Mrs. Petrov, whose Russian accent still colored her words after 20 years of speaking the settlement's common tongue.
She is asking for bread with honey.
Mrs. Petrov said without preamble.
But we have no honey, and when I bring bread alone, she pushes away.
Anna sat at their small table, her chin propped on one hand as she stared toward the wall. But unlike Tommy, she still had color in her cheeks. Still showed signs of the stubborn little girl who'd once convinced half the settlement children to stage a rebellion against mandatory education.
Anna? I sat across from her, noting the way her breathing seemed normal, strong. How are you feeling?
The trees are singing.
She said matter-of-factly.
Pretty songs, but sad too. They want me to come listen.
Mrs. Petrov made a sound like a wounded animal.
Always with trees. Is no trees here, little dove. Only metal and rust and too much sadness.
But Anna shook her head, her young face serious.
Not here trees. Far away trees. Golden trees with golden fruit that tastes like sunshine.
My breath caught. Golden fruit. That was new. None of the other children had mentioned fruit. I pulled out my notebook, scribbling down Anna's words while trying to keep my expression neutral. These golden trees, I said carefully. Can you tell me more about them? Anna's eyes brightened for the first time since I'd arrived.
Oh yes. They grow in a special place where everything is green and alive. The fruit can heal anything, any sickness, any sadness. The trees told me so.
Her voice dropped to a whisper.
They said if I come to them, I can bring the fruit back to help Tommy and Mila and all the sick children.
The room went silent, except for the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Mrs. Petrov crossed herself, murmuring what sounded like prayers in Russian. But I was thinking of old Henrik's words from 3 days ago, half-drunk rambling I'd dismissed as wishful thinking. The divine glade, he'd said. Golden fruit that can cure any ailment. But it's in the gods' territory, Vera. The Worldbreaker's land. Nothing comes back from there. Anna, I kept my voice steady, clinical. Do these trees, do they tell you where this place is?
She nodded eagerly.
Past the mountains, where the ground turns gold and the air tastes like music. They say it's not far, not really. Just past where the scary god lives.
Mrs. Petrov grabbed my arm.
You cannot listen to fever dreams, Vera Ashworth. This plague, it makes them see things that are not real.
But Anna looked more lucid than she had in days. More present, more alive. And something in her description sparked a memory. Fragments of trader stories, scavenger reports that all mentioned the same impossible garden hidden in the most dangerous territory on the continent. I finished my examination of Anna, noting that unlike the other children, she showed no signs of the progressive weakness that marked the wasting plague's advance. If anything, she seemed stronger, more focused, as if the vision of golden trees was feeding her rather than draining her away. Mrs. Petrov, I want you to keep detailed notes about everything Anna says. Every detail about these trees, this place she's seeing. Can you do that?
Of course, but...
And keep her eating, drinking. Whatever she asks for, find a way to get it. I stood, shouldering my medical kit. I think Anna might be different from the others. I left the Petrov dwelling with my mind racing. 7 children showing symptoms, but Anna was the only one talking about golden fruit, the only one who seemed to be gaining strength rather than losing it, the only one whose visions sounded less like fever dreams and more like directions. The settlement's council chamber occupied the largest space in our makeshift community, a converted cargo bay that could hold most of our adult population when necessary. Today it held only the council members themselves, 12 men and women whose ages and experience had earned them decision-making authority in matters affecting the settlement's survival. I found them where I'd expected, seated around their salvaged conference table, heads bowed in prayer. Elder Morrison's weathered voice led the familiar litany, asking for divine intervention to spare the children, for wisdom to understand the plague's purpose, for strength to accept whatever judgment the gods had decreed. The words made my jaw clench. 20 years of divine rule, 20 years of watching the gods treat human beings like livestock, and still these people believed that prayer would save us. That submission and faith would somehow earn us mercy from beings who viewed us as nothing more than sources of biological material. I waited for the prayer to finish, forcing my expression into something resembling respect. When the last amen faded, Elder Morrison looked up with tired eyes that had seen too many tragedies.
Vera, any change in the children?
7 confirmed cases now. Tommy Crane is... I paused, choosing my words carefully. Tommy's condition has worsened. The others remain stable for now.
God's will.
Elder Morrison said automatically, though his voice held no conviction.
Perhaps he is calling these little ones home for a purpose we cannot understand.
Perhaps. I kept my tone neutral, professional, but I've been thinking about alternative approaches to treatment.
Councilwoman Park leaned forward, her expression hopeful.
You found something? A medicine that works?
Not medicine exactly. I pulled out my notebook, flipping to the pages where I'd been collecting fragments of information about the divine glade. I've been researching the old stories, the ones about...
Vera.
Elder Morrison's voice carried a warning.
We've spoken about this before. Folklore won't save these children.
What if it's not folklore? I set my notebook on the table, open to a page covered with trader reports, scavenger accounts, and Anna's fresh testimony. Multiple sources describe the same location. A grove of golden trees, fruit that can heal any ailment. The descriptions are too consistent to be coincidence.
Councilman Torres shook his head.
Even if such a place existed, it would be in the gods' territory, the Worldbreaker's land. You know what that means.
I did know. The Worldbreaker, Kaelan Grimfang, according to settlement records, controlled the most dangerous territory on the continent. Other gods avoided his lands, and the few human expeditions that had ventured there never returned. He was violence incarnate, a being who'd single-handedly destroyed entire armies and crushed rebellions across multiple worlds. But children were dying. 7 now, more tomorrow, and my herbal remedies were as useless as the council's prayers. I'm not suggesting we send an army, I said carefully. A small team, moving quietly. Get in, harvest enough fruit to treat the children. Get out before anyone notices. The silence that followed my words was deafening. I could see the war playing out on their faces, desperate love for their children battling against terror of divine retribution. Finally, Elder Morrison spoke.
Vera, I understand your frustration. We all want to save these children. But what you're suggesting, it's not just dangerous, it's impossible. Even if this divine glade exists, even if we could somehow reach it undetected, do you really think the Worldbreaker would leave such a prize unguarded?
Maybe. Maybe not. I leaned forward, letting some of my desperation show. But what's our alternative? Watch them fade away one by one while we pray to gods who've never shown us mercy?
That's enough.
Councilwoman Park's voice cracked like a whip.
The gods rule by divine right. Our suffering serves a purpose we may not understand, but that doesn't give us the right to steal from them.
The children are dying. The words exploded out of me before I could stop them. Tommy Crane can barely breathe. Mila Henderson hasn't eaten in 3 days. And you want to talk about divine right? What about the right of children to live?
Lower your voice,
Elder Morrison commanded.
and remember where you are. This council has governed this settlement for 20 years through famines, plagues, and divine visitations. We will not risk everyone's lives on the desperate fantasies of one young woman.
The dismissal stung worse than an outright insult. One young woman. As if my gender and age invalidated everything I'd accomplished, every life I'd saved, every crisis I'd helped navigate. As if being 24 meant I couldn't understand the weight of responsibility these men and women carried. But I bit back my anger, forcing my voice into something resembling calm. Then what do you propose? How do we save them?
We pray.
Elder Morrison said simply.
We maintain faith, and we accept that some mysteries are beyond human understanding.
I stared at him, at all of them, seeing the fear that masqueraded as wisdom. They'd spent 20 years learning to accept the unacceptable, to call surrender faith and inaction prudence. The gods had broken something essential in them, some vital spark that made humans willing to fight for what they loved. Fine. I closed my notebook, stood from the table. You pray. I'll continue treating the children with the tools I have.
Vera.
Elder Morrison's voice followed me toward the exit.
Don't do anything foolish. This settlement needs you alive and whole, not dead from some heroic gesture that changes nothing.
I paused at the doorway, my hand on the metal frame. This settlement needs its children alive too. Remember that while you're praying. I left the council chamber with their disapproval burning between my shoulder blades, but with my resolve crystallized like cooled metal. They could accept the unacceptable. They could call surrender wisdom and inaction prudence. But I was my mother's daughter, and Elena Ashworth had never learned how to quit when people she loved were suffering. The divine glade was real. Anna's visions were too detailed, too consistent with the scattered reports I'd been collecting. Somewhere in the Worldbreaker's territory, golden fruit hung heavy on ancient trees, fruit that could heal any ailment. The council could pray for miracles. I was going to steal one. The settlement's corridors felt different as I walked home, as if the metal walls themselves knew about the choice crystallizing in my mind. People nodded as I passed, offering the tired smiles of a community under siege. They trusted me to save their children with wisdom and medicine and the steady competence I'd shown for years. They had no idea their healer was about to become a thief. My family's dwelling occupied 3 connected cargo containers near the settlement's outer ring, cramped but private, with enough space for Father's workshop and Jonas's art corner. I could hear voices from inside as I approached, the familiar rhythm of family argument that had become our evening soundtrack.
Told you to inventory the medical supplies, not reorganize them by color,
Lydia was saying as I entered. She stood near our makeshift kitchen, beautiful even in work clothes, her blonde hair catching the dim light like spun gold. Samuel, 16 and convinced he knew better than everyone, lounged against the wall with the particular slouch that teenagers use to communicate disdain.
Color coding makes more sense. Red for emergency, blue for daily use, green for...
It makes sense to you.
Lydia interrupted.
But Vera's the one who actually uses those supplies, and she's been organizing them her way for years.
I paused in the doorway, surprised. Lydia defending my methods was unusual. My sister had many talents, but supporting my decisions wasn't typically one of them.
Vera.
Father's voice came from his workshop corner, slightly slurred in the way that meant he'd started drinking early today.
Council meeting go well?
About as expected. I set my medical kit on our salvaged dining table, noting the way Samuel's eyes tracked the movement. They're content to pray and wait.
And you're not.
Jonas looked up from his sketch pad, pencil poised over what looked like a drawing of Anna Petrov.
I can see it in your face, Vera. You're planning something.
Trust my artist brother to read the thoughts I was trying to hide. I met his gaze steadily, seeing understanding pass between us. Jonas knew me well enough to recognize the particular set of my shoulders that meant I'd made a dangerous decision. Maybe. I pulled off my jacket, hanging it on the hook Father had welded to the wall years ago. But nothing you need to worry about.
Oh, that's reassuring.
Lydia's voice dripped sarcasm.
Because you never do anything stupidly heroic that puts yourself in danger.
I help people, I said mildly. It's what I do.
It's what you do too much of,
Samuel said, pushing off the wall.
Always running around playing savior while the rest of us handle actual settlement business.
The accusation hit a nerve I'd been trying to ignore. Settlement business like what? Reorganizing medical supplies you've never used? Charming the council members' daughters? Tell me, Samuel, when's the last time you did anything that kept this family alive?
I keep us fed.
His voice rose. Teenage pride stung.
My trading runs bring in more credits than anyone else's.
Because I taught you which routes were safe and which contacts could be trusted, I shot back. Because I patched you up after your first 3 disasters and convinced Father not to ban you from the trading post.
Enough.
Father's voice cut through our argument, tired but firm.
We don't fight each other. Not in this house.
Marcus Ashworth emerged from his workshop, wiping greasy hands on a rag that had seen better decades. At 52, he still carried himself like the university professor he'd been before the conquest, but 20 years of settlement life had carved deep lines around his eyes and turned his hair silver white.
Vera's right.
He said quietly.
About the trading runs, she's right about a lot of things.
His gaze found mine, and for a moment I saw past the alcohol and grief to the brilliant man who'd once been my mother's equal partner.
That doesn't mean she should carry all the weight alone.
The simple acknowledgement nearly broke me. Father so rarely spoke about the burden I carried, so rarely acknowledged the way our family's survival rested on my shoulders. Having him say it aloud, in front of my siblings, felt like finally being seen.
Dad?
Lydia's voice was softer now, uncertain.
Is there really nothing we can do? For the children?
He was quiet for a long moment, his engineer's mind working through problems and possibilities.
There might be something,
he said finally.
Old stories about golden fruit, trees that grow in impossible places. But the cost.
He shook his head.
The cost would be too high.
What if it wasn't? The words slipped out before I could stop them. What if there was a way to reach these trees without paying the price everyone expects? Father's eyes sharpened, and I saw him truly focus on me for the first time in months.
Vera, what are you thinking?
I looked around at my family. Brilliant, broken father, beautiful, selfish Lydia, artistic, sensitive Jonas, proud, reckless Samuel. They were flawed and frustrating and impossible, but they were mine. And if I was going to risk everything on a desperate gamble, they deserved to know. I'm thinking, I said slowly, that sometimes the impossible is just another word for nobody's tried hard enough yet.
The silence that followed was different from the council chamber's rejection. This silence held calculation, possibility, the particular tension that came when a family realized one of their own was about to step into legend. Jonas set down his pencil.
You're really going to try, aren't you? You're going to go after the golden fruit.
The divine glade is real, I said simply. The children are dying. Someone has to try.
Not someone.
Samuel pushed off the wall again, but this time his posture was different. Less slouch, more attention.
You're really going to steal from the Worldbreaker.
When he put it that way, the plan sounded like suicide. Maybe it was. But Tommy Crane's transparent skin and Anna Petrov's golden visions were burned into my memory, and I'd rather die trying than live with the knowledge that I'd let children fade away without fighting. I need to think about it more, I lied, plan it properly. But my family knew me too well. They could see the decision crystallizing in my eyes, the way my shoulders straightened with grim resolve. One by one, I watched them understand that their daughter, their sister, their healer, was about to become something else entirely. A thief who stole from gods. Outside our dwelling, night settled over Millbrook settlement like a familiar blanket. The mountains rose against the star-scattered sky, their peaks marking the border between safety and the Worldbreaker's domain. Somewhere beyond those peaks, golden trees swayed in impossible groves, their fruit heavy with healing power. The council could pray for miracles. My family could worry about impossible costs. But I was Elena Ashworth's daughter, and I'd learned long ago that sometimes love meant choosing action over safety, hope over surrender. The golden apples were waiting, and tomorrow I would answer their call.